until we get started.
I never do it. Nope, I never do it. Oh, at least. Yeah, no, I'm gonna go for 20 tonight. I know that there's a few. Oh, it's too bad. I'm going. Oh no, I was given 5, but I'm gonna take 20.
So would it be easier for you? I can just do this over here.
Okay, great.
And that way, you know.
Our projector isn't working, so I'm just trying to set up.
Okay.
Our
You want to
backup
do it?
projector.
You want? Wait a minute. Hey. What? It's amazing. It's amazing what technology will do for you. Get you all excited. Is this working? It is. It is working. So thank you all for taking the time to be here this evening. This is the second of 2 community forums on public safety. And for those who weren't at the first community forum, some of this will be new to you. For those, I ask that you just bear with me. For those who don't know, I'm Karen Paul. I'm the president of the Burlington City Council, and I'm also chair of the Public Safety Committee. I do want to acknowledge the work of two of my council colleagues who serve on the Public Safety Committee, that being Milo Grant and Tim Doherty. Their unique perspectives have greatly improved our collective work. So thank you to both of them. As we all know, we have our basic human needs of shelter, of food to sustain us, and of clothing to wear. But there is also another great human impulse, and that is the need for safety and security. We all want to keep one another safe. We all want to live in a community that values both compassion and support with accountability to ensure that there is order. And following the global pandemic that we all lived through, we saw what has been an uneven and inequitable economic recovery. That has forced too many to be unsheltered and struggling for basic necessities. And it's no secret that our community's health and safety are being challenged with unprecedented crime, a growing need for mental health supports, and an influx of synthetic drugs, among other challenges. So it was against this backdrop that on October 10th, the Public Safety Committee brought to the Burlington City Council a resolution declaring the unprecedented increase in drug use to be our city's top public health and public safety priority. And the meeting was attended by over 400 people. There were 50 community members that spoke that evening during public forum. And while there certainly was a wave of despair in many of the people that spoke, there also were a lot of rays of hope that were expressed, that solutions can be found, and that if we can embrace change and we can embrace new solutions, that we can find our way to the other side of this. It's the job of your elected officials and professionals charged with keeping our community safe to take on these challenges and to provide opportunities for our community to express your views to your elected leaders at all levels of government, and to work to find solutions so that we can find our way to the community that we all want for one another. This is why one of the items in the October 10th resolution was the creation of these community forums. The point of these forums is twofold. If we're going to solve a problem, we need to be informed. We need to all be informed. We need to educate ourselves, and we need to learn from experts. Shortly, we will hear from a panel of professionals to learn about substance use disorder and property crimes. At our last community forum, we talked about drug trafficking and gun crimes, and that is available if you wish to view that on CCTV. The other key point of these forums is to hear from you, for you to ask questions, which some people have submitted questions in advance, and you're welcome also to speak after the speakers and to ask questions at that time. But it's also an opportunity to offer suggestions, creative and innovative approaches to our safety concerns, because we all know that the time for boldness is upon us. We also know that the reason that you are here, and the reason for the many city councilors that are here, as well as other elected officials, we know that the reason that our community is here is because you care, because you want things to be better, and also because you're ready to contribute and you're ready to impact your community. Thank you once again for joining us this evening. I will turn the forum over to Mayor Moreau Weinberger to introduce our panel, and we'll get the program underway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Karen Paul, for kicking us off tonight and for your leadership on the resolutions that led to these two public forums. We, as Karen said, are going to try to, the presentations at least, you know, the questions can go where they go. The presentations are going to focus on substance use disorder and property crime. We do have with us tonight, I'll go around the table, Nicholas Karist, who is the U.S. Attorney for the District of Vermont, and who was supposed to be on last week's panel, and will a little bit bridge the topics, and which is good, I think, because there is there are two sides to our efforts to address the drug crisis that we're facing now. We're going to be talking a lot tonight about the treatment side and the supports that we're trying to put in place. We do continue to have robust enforcement efforts at both at the federal, the local, the state level, and some of Cola's remarks are going to focus on that. We have State's Attorney Sarah George here as well. who is going to be speaking, I think, probably on both sides of this, but primarily on the property crime. Chief Murad is here to speak about property crime as well. We are fortunate to have the state's top public health official, Dr. Mark Levine, with us. Because he's here, I'm following CDC guidance and continuing to wear my N95 mask, even though I'm in day 8 of recovery from COVID last week. We have Jess Kirby, who is a leader in an organization called Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform, which is based here in Burlington and is a great example of some of the ways the recent round of innovations that is going on to try to respond to the situation we're facing. And then Rachel Jolie, who is the head of our Community Justice Center, is here as well. So I will try to serve as a little bit of a moderator over the course of the night, so when we get to the questions. I'm also just going to kick things off, if we can advance the slides, with a short presentation about the city's work on opioids, which at this point goes back a number of years. It goes back just to 2016, when we started something called Community Stat. The idea with this meeting, which started then and has continued to meet more or less monthly since then for 7 years now, it is a meeting that consistently has between 30 and 70 different organizations represented. The crux of it is to try to free Chittenden County from the grip of what we first conceived of as the opioid crisis, and still to some degree think of that way, but it is a crisis, I think, that has broadened to include non-opioids as well, and but it's all part of the same overall challenge. For the first, I would say, 3+ years of Community Stat's existence, there was a great sense of forward momentum and progress. There was a lot of initiatives that, at least in some way, came out of discussions that happened at this monthly meeting that was led by myself and Chief Brandon Del Pozo. For a few of the kind of major examples, the hospital dramatically reduced its opioid prescribing rate after a study published by the Burlington Police Department showing that opioid use prescribing actually increased from 2013 to 2014, which was a shocking outcome. After that study and discussion at Community Stat, over the next couple of years, opioid prescribing dropped by 60%. After many years of having a long waiting list to get into treatment at our hub, in a period of about 6 months, once this multi-agency group that I should say involves city officials, it involves everyone here sitting at the table, it involves defense attorneys, it involves officials from the UVM Medical Center, really just about every agency, every sector of the community that has some window into the drug problem is represented at that table. And after the discussions at that table, the wait to get into medically assisted treatment at the Chittenden County hub went to 0 in a very short period of time. The new opportunities to get into treatment, we found even though there was no waiting list, it still took too long for people to actually get all the way through the process of getting into treatment. And we called them nodes, were created at our needle exchange, called Safe Recovery, in the UVM Medical Center emergency room. This was a statewide effort, but we had been advocates on this. The state started really one of what is to this day, I think, the best program in the country for providing medically assisted treatment for people who are in prison. All that happened during those years, and there seemed to be a key metric that we've always watched is the number of opioid deaths, which peaked. The first peak we experienced here was, if you just go back, in 2017, there were 35 deaths here in Chittenden County. That dropped to 17 in 2018. It stayed at that level in 2019. If you now advance to the next slide, this is the statewide data. The state, too, was seeing if you look in right at the beginning of 2020, there was something of a downward trend. The next slide shows the national trends. There too was a little bit of a dip in 19, and there was some hope in that period. And then what has happened in the year since 2020 is just been a complete reversal about what looked like there was progress. And this slide now is missing 2022 and 2023, and both nationally and I believe in the state. Maybe Dr. Levine, you'll have, if you have a different perspective on this, let me know. But I believe 2022 was a record-breaking year nationally and in the state, and I believe 2023 is very likely to be as well. So it is heartbreaking to see what seemed like a period of progress completely reverse itself and go in the wrong direction. If we go to the next slide, why have things turned around? I think there's some debate over this, but maybe not too much. From my perspective, the biggest thing that happened is that over the course of 2020, in a short period of time, something we had feared for some time took place, which is that fentanyl arrived here. Prior to 2020, here in Chittenden County, fentanyl had been somewhat rare. The main illicit drugs were oxycodone and heroin and other kind of opioids of that generation. When fentanyl arrived, and it was a game changer. It is, to just give a couple examples of why it is so different than prior drugs. It is many times more powerful. People are much more likely to overdose and die immediately. Other pernicious effects are that people, whereas a heroin or oxycodone user would take drugs 2 or 3 times a day, every 8 to 10 hours, fentanyl is very different. The effects of fentanyl, the euphoric effects of fentanyl wear off very quickly, and people start to go into a withdrawal within about 2 hours. So people are taking fentanyl 8 to 10 times a day. It is a much less expensive drug because it's one that is made in labs with compounds that are produced in China and Mexico and brought here by cartels, and it is quite ubiquitous. The other major change is we are dealing, like I mentioned before, with more than just opioids. Xylazine is a drug people will hear about. Meth has become a fairly dominant drug as well. And these are stimulants that are in many cases being mixed in with the opioids and treating them is more complicated. This shows, just sort of graphically shows nationally how fentanyl, the gray line is fentanyl, how that's become so dominant. And if we could advance to the next slide. You know, next 2 slides are my last 2 slides. One, I just want to be clear, we have in no way given up on the importance of treatment, despite the sort of setbacks and despite the new challenges that fentanyl and these other drugs present. We have been realizing really since 2021 that the ground, the kind of landscape had shifted underneath us and we needed to try new things, and a number of new things have been tried by the city of Burlington. The city of Burlington entering into areas that we never had direct involvement or operational engagement in before. Example of that is the Elmwood Avenue Emergency Shelter, where the city is bringing what we call a public health approach to that 35-person shelter on Elmwood Avenue, and there's a high level. There's treatment is directly available to people who are living at that shelter. We have used our federal ARPA dollars and the first of our opioid settlement dollars, something you might probably come up a number of times tonight. One glimmer of hope is there are new resources flowing into this area. The city gets some, the state gets a much larger pool of these funds. The city has invested some directly into this organization called Vermonters for Criminal Justice Reform. Jess will tell you more about that in just a bit. We have hired new positions within the police department to help us engage and try to get help for people that the police department encounters, these social workers, community service liaisons. Not a capacity we really had. We had one person with this kind of background before the pandemic. We now have 6. And we continue to try to innovate and try new things. Another example of something that started at the community stat table and was quickly deployed. Chief LaChance, our fire chief, who participates in those community stat tables and also saw the impact that this drug crisis is having on his department, launched a pilot that involves overtime. It's voluntary overtime, two-person teams going out and engaging directly with people who are suffering from overdoses or proactively engaging other people around the city. If you go to the last slide, there's an even longer list of things that is my sense we need additional new things that we need to do here. And we don't have time to go into each one of them, but I will close by saying this is actually a very timely time to be having this discussion, because there's something called the Opioid Advisory Settlement Committee, which I serve on, Jess serves on. Commissioner Levine is really the lead of this committee. We are meeting again on Friday to talk about the next investment of state resources, the state opioid settlement dollars. We've made $8 million in recommendations that were accepted by the legislature and made into law in May. We are hoping that in the very early part of the year, and I see that we have some legislators with us tonight, we're hoping there's some additional legislative action to get even more funds out and deployed and having an impact on the ground. I think I should leave it there, and we should move on, and we can get into some of the details of these additional initiatives as we get into further conversation and questions. So I think next up we have Commissioner Levine. Welcome. We really appreciate, with all of your responsibilities, you coming to a local event like this, which is not unusual, people should know. The commissioner is a frequent participant at that community stat table, despite the fact that sometimes there's pent-up frustration and anger voiced towards state officials. He comes time and time and is engaged and been a major part in our efforts to grapple at the Chittenden County level with what's going on. I consider him a partner in this work. Hope I haven't worn out my welcome with him, and I really appreciate you being here tonight, Commissioner Levine.
Thanks much. Pleasure to be here. I won't need the slides for a couple minutes. So I've been given 7 minutes, so I'll try to adhere to that and make some fairly focal comments. Obviously, substance use disorder has always been and will continue to be a very high-profile issue. Chronically, it's related, of course, to the tragic loss of life that we see many days of the year from opioid overdoses. But now it's even under more focus, and I would submit that's because of this intersection of substance use disorder with mental health, homelessness, poverty, public safety issues, you name it, that are all coexisting at the same time. If we actually look at 2021 data from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, Vermont's rate of opioid misuse in that year was really very similar to the nation, 3.2%. Now, I would posit that the number of individuals is actually not increasing, but what has changed is that the problem is intensifying due to the fact that there's more public use of these substances, and very importantly, because of the toxicity of the drug supply. This is why opioid use disorder is in the headlines all the time. With increased overdose deaths, they almost always involve fentanyl, and now universally, they're almost always mixed substances, especially with cocaine, methamphetamine, and xylazine leading the pack. Please, though we'll be talking a lot about opioids, keep in mind that a data-informed approach tells us that actually alcohol is the most commonly used substance. Alcohol-attributed deaths and years of potential life lost each increased by 36% from 2017 to 21. Also, stimulant use is on the rise, as you heard just from the mayor, and research indicates that stimulants lead to a higher risk of criminal behavior, in part because their effects can include aggressiveness, irritability, and even lead to psychosis. And finally, Vermont is seeing increases in adult use, hospitalizations, and poisonings from cannabis. Keep all that in mind, and remember that the individual who has substance use disorder is suffering from really a chronic disease of the brain. Like other chronic diseases, diabetes, heart disease, you name it, they all have remissions, they all have relapses. It's been very useful to have these viewed as a public health issue. It's done a lot to reduce stigma and to reinforce the approach we take, which is really this continuum of prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery. But I completely understand that the successful framing of substance use disorder in this way and the reduction in stigma are both under significant challenge now in the current circumstances where the public is appropriately concerned about their safety and their children's welfare from what they're seeing. Now, Vermont is highly advanced in all aspects of the continuum I just mentioned, and the data really do indicate high uptake of services. Our federal partners attest that Vermont is actually nation leading in its expansive programmatic approaches, and it's continually evolving its systems and programs. I won't be exhaustive in what we're doing tonight due to time limitations, but I'm confident the panel will touch on what is missing and what might be added in the future. Now, you heard a little bit about the Opioid Settlement Advisory Committee, so let's get to what we're most recently doing and where the needs are. So we've had this good fortune of being able to receive funds from a variety of opioid settlement litigations, and that will continue for many years. The committee that the mayor and I are on was legislatively created. The first slide here shows the principles under which we operate. So some of these are borrowed from Johns Hopkins and adapted to Vermont. First of all, unlike what happened to tobacco money in the past, spend the money on the crisis and supplement, but don't supplant what's already being spent, and don't spend it all at once. Well, we're going to get settlement money for potentially 18 years. Not the same huge amounts every year, but 18 years. Use evidence to guide spending. Everything we do is data informed. Invest in youth prevention, a hallmark of what we should do, but not something we've done yet to date. Focus on equity, which generally means racial equity in the way it's framed, but I would submit in Vermont, equally important is geographic equity, because there's a vast difference in what different locations have and don't have. And then finally, public health leadership guiding a fair and transparent process to decide what's spent, which we actually do, and that is done through actively engaging key groups and people with lived experience. Having told you what we should do all the time, I will tell you that in the first year, we chose to focus, because of the increase in opioid overdose deaths and the fact that our social autopsy data, which really is looking at everyone who's died of an overdose and understanding as much as we can about all of them, told us that a high percentage of the deaths that have occurred are in people who have never had contact with the treatment system at all, and often who died alone. Our committee decided to direct funds exclusively to harm reduction efforts and to ways to encourage treatment for those who, for whatever their reason, had chosen not to do so. So prevention at the level of those who have a known substance use disorder is called harm reduction, which most of you probably know. And traditionally, we have these, what the mayor referred to as needle exchanges. They're called syringe service programs that often have a mobile component and really are there to develop a trusting community. And they provide very comprehensive harm reduction services. In a year's period of time, 2022 to 23, they reached 4,000 Vermonters, including 1,400 who had never utilized the system of care. A settlement dollar offspring to that is listed here, the telehealth wound care consultation pilot. That's because of xylozine's devastating impact in causing really horrific and often super-infected wounds that could be life-threatening. The goal here, again, through a program like that is forging a connection with people and providing access to care that might not have been accessed at all. Naloxone distribution is thriving through traditional community partner methodologies and pharmacy channels, through what we call leave behind packs that EMS will provide someone with when they've responded to an overdose, especially for those who have chosen not to take the ride into the emergency room, but choose not to do that. So they get all the materials they need at the time. We just started a mail-in program at the health department, and in the first week, there were like 500 requests. So this is a nice stigma-free way of getting access to naloxone, just asking us to mail it to you, as is vending machines, which actually I don't see listed up there, but they're another major part of the naloxone distribution policy. And they will be appearing in early 2024 to a community near you. Other uses of settlement money include ways to protect users of illicit substances to gain knowledge about what they purchased, so fentanyl and xylazine test strips, drug checking services with drug checking machines that again are free of liability to those who do the checking or those who bring the powder to the machine to get checked. And finally, in the harm reduction arena, you'll see contingency management for stimulant use disorder. So many of the deaths, I believe, are in people who thought they were purchasing stimulants and ended up with an extra bang for their buck with fentanyl, and they may not have had any tolerance to fentanyl and succumbed to that drug and died. Contingency management is a very evidence-based, it's a reinforcing mechanism kind of thing. I won't go into great details about it, but it's effective in this stimulant use disorder. Then the last two things are enhancing access to the treatment system. Just to give you an overview, the treatment system involves 4 residential sites through our so-called preferred provider network, the hub system, which is where methadone may be delivered by addiction medicine specialists, as well as buprenorphine. There's 8 locations, 4,000 patients actively being treated. Bennington will soon have its own, and through the opioid settlement monies, 3 more located, one in the Windham County area where there's a geographic access issue, one in Addison County, and another in Burlington, which you'll hear more about, to supplement what's already going on in this community. There's also going to be one in a correctional facility. Then we have the spoke system, which is over 225 prescribers, 8,000 people actively getting buprenorphine through that mechanism. The settlement monies will provide money for the 4 medication dosing units, which are these extra hubs that I just described, and to a program of outreach workers. Again, using the data we have saying there are people that we're not finding and they're actually dying, and they don't seem to be able to access the system. Maybe it isn't friendly for them, maybe they don't know how to do it, maybe they just aren't ready in their stages of thinking about what they're going to do about their life and their condition. But having outreach workers at our syringe service programs, at all of our treatment programs that actually can make forays into the community, whether people are on the streets, whether in a shelter, whether they're referred to them by law enforcement or by social service agencies, finding people who might be homeless just to make sure we can make a connection. My last comment will just be a little bit playing on the mayor's last comment about the pace of change, which we should appropriately be concerned about. You know, addressing substance use disorder in its many forms and preventing accidental overdoses are probably among the most complex public health challenges and safety challenges I or anybody else at this table have ever faced. Effective responses must be data-informed and well thought out. That takes time. Implementing many of the strategies that are on the slide actually take rigorous federal regulatory approvals, which take many times and hoops to jump through, and they take workforce, which is very stressed and has been described as, for our substance use program unit, the single largest threat to the provision of services, and I'm sure many in this room can attest to that. So as the panel continues to the rest of this time, please keep in mind that we're talking about people, family members, friends, neighbors, strangers, each in a different place regarding their addiction, and each arriving to a different place over time. So for each of them, we have an obligation to do what's in our power to address the challenges to their health and recovery. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Levine. Jess, who was just here a moment ago, you know, just had to step out for a moment. She's not feeling well. Hopefully she'll be able to return. But if we could advance, I think the next so we're going to shift gears. We will, if Jess is able to return, we'll come back to the treatment discussion. But first, I will hand the mic over to Sarah George. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. I am going to try to get through these quickly because I think we're already behind. I put some slides together really just to give some numbers and some facts out there to the community about what our office is and is not doing right now related to substance use disorder, but specifically for my role and property crime. So I'm going to go through just our some of our current caseloads, and then some of the reasons that I'll go through our backlog, our COVID-related backlog, statewide and in Chittenden County, and then some of the ways that it has kind of got to where it is, and some of the ways we're going to try to get it under control. So I think go ahead. You can go to the next one. Okay, so our office, as you all know, Chittenden, we serve the entire county. We are about a third of the state's population. We have currently, or as of last Tuesday, I believe, 3,049 pending cases, so probably slightly more than that a week later. We have 9 pending homicide cases, and first-degree and second-degree murder cases, and then 9 attempted murder, both first-degree and second-degree murder cases pending. We have 142 aggravated assaults pending, 45 assault and robberies, although I charged one this morning, so more than that. Burglaries, we have 139 pending. And then those next two, operation without owner's consent and grand larceny, those are our equivalent of a car theft. We don't actually have a car theft statute in Vermont, so we use one or both of those two charges in order to grasp that particular crime, depending on the evidence. So there might be some grand larcenies that we have pending where somebody stole something else, but I didn't go through all 65 of them. But for the most part, if you see a grand larceny charged, it is likely for the theft of a car. And there is certainly an uptick in that. And then retail thefts. We have 764 retail thefts pending. So I put some of these out there because I know that there is a rhetoric in the community that our office is not charging these things, that our office is not charging retail thefts or anything. And so I just wanted to put some numbers up there so people can see what we are dealing with. And I also put a note, so Chittenden County has 18 homicide-related cases pending. That does not include the double homicide that recently occurred that is unsolved. These are ones that we have charged and are pending in our office. It certainly also doesn't mean that we aren't working on them. Working very closely with BPD and other agencies that might have unsolved ones. And I put up there that, as of last week, there are 80 homicide-related cases pending in Vermont. So 18 of those in Chittenden County versus the 80 total in Vermont. So again, of those 3,049 cases, my office has 14 deputy state's attorneys. 10 of us do the criminal docket, so including myself. So those 3,000 cases are distributed amongst 10 of us. I have a full caseload. I have 172 cases. Some people in my office have over 300 cases, and then some of the more specialized dockets, like the Chittenden Unit for Special Investigations prosecutor, has, closer to 100. So I think she has the smallest caseload at 102 or 103. The DSA positions, deputy state's attorney's positions, are actually decided by the legislature. They decide the number of prosecutor positions that are given to the entire state. Those position numbers are then given to our central office down in Montpelier, and our executive committee that's made up of 5 state's attorneys. I am not one of them. They decide who and what counties get those positions. So I don't have any control over how many positions I have. That is a decision that is made in Montpelier. And then we have just recently started getting these backlog data from central office and from the court, which has been helpful for us to sort of know each month what we're looking at for pending cases as well as backlog cases. So if you go to the next one, specifically the backlog, this is November and December, and it's all the counties. So you can kind of see the sort of difference and comparison amongst counties. Chittenden County, again, has 3,049 cases, and 1,000 of those are considered backlog. So how the court determines that is they have special guidelines about when a case should be disposed, and if it goes beyond that disposition deadline, it's considered a backlog case. So, I just sort of put that up there. 1/3 of our pending cases are past disposition guidelines, and as you can imagine, we are adding to the backlog every time we charge a case before really being able to get rid of as many. So that goes to the clearance rate, which is the next one, and this is math is definitely not my strong suit, and clearance rates very much confuse me, but my understanding is that you want the higher clearance rate to a certain point, but then for some of these counties that are really small, like Grand Isle, for example, I think has about 80 pending cases, so when they have a clearance rate of 240%, it means that they resolved more than they charged, which is a lot easier to do when you have a smaller caseload. For Chittenden, I've been told our clearance rates are actually really good and some of the best in the state compared to our population, but it doesn't feel great when you see that 1/3 of your pending cases are past that guideline. Go ahead. You can go to the next one. Go ahead. Okay, so part of the reason that our backlog is the way it is, when COVID hit in March of 2020, our courts closed. They closed on March 15th, I believe, of 2020, and they reopened fully on September 6th or September 8th of last year, 2022. So unlike a lot of places that had reopened much quicker than we did, our courts did not have trials that entire time. At Chittenden County specifically, I can't totally speak for other counties, but I don't believe anybody did. And so before COVID, we had a turnaround of cases coming to our office from law enforcement that was about 6 to 8 weeks from the time the incident occurred. And because of COVID, we were only allowed to arraign, I think, 15 cases a week, was what the court sort of allotted us for time, which you can imagine, if that's the case, we are not going to pick retail thefts. We were prioritizing crimes of violence, specifically domestic violence, which we were seeing an uptick in, and any other felony crimes of violence. And we were really asking law enforcement to figure something out using their CJCs and other alternative methods when they could, and if they couldn't, to cite the person out much farther, so that by the time, our hope was that by the time that person would come in, we'd have a little bit more court time or court access. So we had significantly limited time, and so those 6 to 8 week turnarounds were becoming 12 to 16, if not sometimes more than that. There was online reporting began in Burlington, which there was a significant backlog in that, and that was, we're still getting cases now for incidents that were reported online in February, March, and April. We're just getting that paperwork from law enforcement because of their backlog, which we're working with BPD to try to figure out how to streamline that. But that, I think, is one of those issues that it will resolve, and we're just in it right now. But understandably, for a long time, people thought that our office wasn't doing anything. When I'd look into it, we never got the paperwork. So we've been trying to figure out how to get those cases into us sooner, because I think we can all imagine that when you're trying to address somebody's behavior 8 months later, 9 months later, some of those people have been incarcerated since, some of those people have resolved all of their other cases and are actually doing well since, and so it's really not conducive to good public safety to have such a delayed response. And then, overall, we are trying to get all law enforcement back on that 6-week turnaround. We've gotten used to a bit more time to do their paperwork and whatnot, so I think that they are all attempting to do that as quickly as they can. But overall, I think the next slide, I'll get into this a little bit, but overall because of our COVID backlog, we are certainly prioritizing crimes of violence and people who are incarcerated in terms of resolving their cases and trying those cases. Go to the next one. So once we've been getting these cases from law enforcement, or when we get these cases from law enforcement, there's then a significant delay in the litigation of the cases. And that is due to, a lot of things. We've been down judges for most of the last few years. We haven't had as much court time to actually litigate the cases. Trial dates, as you can imagine, are the sort of last opportunity for people to resolve their cases, and a lot of people wait until the last minute to do that. And so when you don't have a trial date to use as that sort of last minute, if you don't do this, we're going to go to trial, defense attorneys understand, and their clients know that if they just wait, the case will just continue to get delayed. And that has certainly been happening. So we didn't have any trial dates from March 20th through September 22. And now we're given about 1 to 3 trial days a month, which again, to get through 1,000 cases, at best you're getting through three cases. You're getting 3 cases tried a month. But if you have a case, which are the ones that we're going to prioritize again for trial, they're crimes of violence, sometimes you need more than that. You need to take all 3 days for one case. For example, January, we're trying a homicide case, and so that's going to take up the entire month of January. So we're not going to try any other cases when we're trying the homicide case. It also takes away a judge for the entire month to try that case, so he's not available in any of our other courtrooms. Typically, when we are resolving these cases and the cases are pending, we do everything we can to connect people with services while their cases are pending so that we have better outcomes at the end. And the services and resources that we typically have are just not as robust in our community as they used to be. Again, through COVID, they just have not been what they used to be. So we don't have as many options to send people. The Department of Corrections also, without any input from state's attorneys across the state, got rid of the one program we used a lot, or we attempted to use a lot, that resolved a lot of cases. And so we lost a really good tool that we had. And then I think just litigation barriers when cases are pending, as long as they are, we lose witnesses either due to frustration, understandably, or relocation, or they get a new phone number, they get a new address, and we struggle to find them. So there's like actual costs to these cases being pending for as long as they are, because people understandably get really frustrated and either decide they don't want to be a part of this anymore, or we just can't find them. And of course, probable cause versus beyond a reasonable doubt. I put that to say that we get cases from law enforcement, and the burden to charge a case is probable cause, which is a pretty low standard. It means that the person more often than more likely than not committed the crime. But in order to actually prove the case, we have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a significantly higher portion, higher burden. So again, when cases are pending for 6-9 months plus, the evidence doesn't get better as those cases go on. So we really are trying to streamline cases while they're pending for all of those particular reasons. And then finally, the next one, pretrial. There is a lot of rhetoric. I get a lot of emails. I get a lot of tagged in a lot of conversations happening online about individuals being out on the streets while they have cases pending. And so I just want to go in a little bit to talk about the ways that people can be held in jail pretrial. And I will start by saying it is incredibly rare. And it is incredibly rare because the laws require that it be incredibly rare. So first is cash bail. Cash bail is, go ahead to the next one. Cash bail is determined by judges. It is not determined by prosecutors. Judges are the only people that can impose cash bail, and it is up to them how much is an appropriate amount. Prosecutors can certainly request bail, but the law requires that the judge be the one that make findings, and it's up to them whether they can impose bail and for how much. If it is being imposed, they are required to impose a reasonable amount that is based on the person's income. And they cannot impose cash bail on a case where a person is charged with a misdemeanor and appeared for their arraignment. When a judge is deciding whether to impose cash bail on somebody, it has to be because that person has a proven risk of flight. So the judge doesn't say, this is a charge related to public safety, and because of the public safety risks, I'm going to impose cash bail. They can only impose cash bail if the person is a proven risk of flight, not if the person is a public safety risk. So it doesn't matter whether the person has one charge pending or 30. If they are not a risk of flight, the judge cannot impose cash bail. And then they can't impose cash bail for more than $200 on any case that is expungement eligible, which is most misdemeanors and nonviolent felonies. And then conditions of release on the next one. This is a lot of legal jargon, but any person charged with an offense other than someone being held without bail shall, at their appearance before a judicial officer, be ordered release pending trial. So this is a long slide to say that the conditions of release by law have to be the least restrictive combination of conditions that will reasonably ensure the protection of the public. They cannot impose more strict conditions than absolutely necessary. And we have judges that get overturned on this by the Supreme Court pretty regularly for attempting to impose conditions like a responsible adult condition when the law does not allow it. A responsible adult condition can sometimes hold people in jail while they work to procure a responsible adult that can take custody of them. But that has to be on listed offenses. So again, if you go back to car thefts, neither of our statutes regarding car thefts are listed offenses, so those are not eligible for a responsible adult condition. Neither are retail thefts, drug possessions, grand larcenies, burglaries, and trafficking of drugs. None of those by statute are considered listed offenses. And then the hold without bail is the next one and last one. This is the sort of, in other jurisdictions, it's called remand. You might see it on Law and Order. A person that's charged with a violent felony may be held without bail, but it is a very high standard for the state. We have to show that the evidence of guilt is great, and the court has to find, after an evidentiary hearing, that the person, if released, would pose a substantial threat of physical violence to any person, and that no condition or combination of conditions will prevent that violence. So when we ask for this, if the court agrees, they have to set it for an evidentiary hearing. We have to actually put on our entire evidence as if a mini trial and ask the court to hold the person without bail. And unless it is a murder or an attempted murder, even if the court agrees with us, the statute only allows for us to hold them in jail for 60 days. So after the 60 days is up, the court by statute shall impose conditions of release. And again, engage in the same least restrictive conditions analysis that I talked about in the last slide. Again, if the charge is murder or attempted murder, then the presumption is actually that they are held indefinitely, and the defense has to come up with a plan to show the court that that person should be released. I don't believe I've seen that happen yet. And so, I would just say, too, that means that witnesses and victims need to be available to testify. So going back to that probable cause versus beyond a reasonable doubt, you can probably imagine there's a lot of victims that a day, a week, 10 days after an incident occurred do not want to testify in court. Some flat out refuse to. So there are times where we may make a decision that it is not worth it for that person to testify against the person if we can come up with other conditions that will keep them safe. But generally speaking, on violent felonies, we do ask for it. We'll have hearings if the court agrees, and then the person is released after that 60 days is up. So again, if you see that somebody was charged with an assault and robbery and then 3 months later is back in the streets or back in our community, that is because that's what the law requires. So I think that is the highlights. We are working really closely with law enforcement. We work really closely with VCJR and Rachel Jolly and all of our other community justice centers. We are constantly trying to figure out ways to hold people responsible, hold them accountable, and also engage them in the services that they really desperately need. And it's an uphill battle right now, and I understand everybody's frustration around what they're seeing, but we really are doing what we can to address it. I think that's it. The last slide has, maybe not. The last slide should have my email, sarah.george@vermont.gov. I have had emails from a lot of you in this room. I think most people would say I answer them. And I would much prefer if you see something on social media or in the media and you question it, please feel free anytime to reach out. I will tell you what I can. There are some things I obviously cannot share, but I will do my best to explain the situation to anybody that reaches out to me, because I would much rather that than the continuation of false information. I think it's really harmful in the community, and I really want to be available to people. Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I was over my 10 minutes.
Thank you. I want to share with everyone that these presentations will all be posted on Civic Clerk, the city's interface for posting this kind of information. We are definitely running a little bit behind, so we'll go to Rachel next, Colo, and then we'll come back to you, Jess, okay? And take it away, Rachel, and if you can pick up sometime, that'd be great.
Yeah, I'll try. Less than 5 minutes, I will approach that, or try to. Hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Jolly. I head up the Community Justice Center, which is a division of CEDO, the Community and Economic Development Office. We are part of an infrastructure in Vermont that a lot of people don't know about, but hopefully will. We're one of 23 centers that get state funding for using restorative processes or restorative justice in some way. So the Burlington Community Justice Center is under our municipality. Most of those 23 centers are nonprofits. Chittenden County has 4 community justice centers. We are a center that actually serves the whole county with some of our programs, mostly post-charge programs. So we operate on all stages of the continuum of the criminal legal system. So we can get referrals directly from law enforcement. Those are called pre-charge, so those are before they go to Sarah's office. When we have an MOU in place with the department to talk about the kinds of crimes that can go, generally those are low-level misdemeanors, first-time folks first-time offenders or people who have, are responsible, they would be referred, and then we operate from there on too in terms of post-charge, but pre-adjudication, also post-adjudication, court-ordered, as well as reentry. We also work with folks after incarceration when they're coming back into the community to help ensure their success, that they are, have already dealt with the accountability for their crime, but we're also trying to support them as they reestablish themselves. So the two things that I want to mention is one that we've been hearing a lot tonight about some of the downstream impacts, downstream effects of a lot of these needs that have been built up. Commissioner Levine mentioned poverty, trauma, substance use, mental health, houselessness. We're seeing kind of the worst of that, the perfect storm added with COVID, the pandemic. A lot of people might say that the opposite of addiction is connection. And connection is something that we really need to be investing in, and that's what some of our kind of pilot programs or these innovative responses are talking about. And that's some of what the CJC can offer in its downstream programming. We have 10 different programs. Most of them are post-harm or post-crime. We have a program that's specifically for victims of crime called Parallel Justice. Because so much of this, once you're in the criminal legal system, is very time-consuming. It leaves kind of victims out on the sidelines waiting for some kind of response to their needs. Parallel Justice is an attempt to fill some of the gaps. And it's there for folks, whether you report your crime or not, whether the criminal legal system is involved or not, whether the person responsible for the crime is caught or not. So that's just a program that I would like everybody to know about if you've unfortunately already been a victim of crime, or if you know somebody who has, at least you can offer up that service. We have a lot of information on our website, and the contact information is there. I also think there's an opportunity for the community to get more involved in terms of, and for the city in terms of investing in those proactive responses for community referrals, or where we want to have, right now we don't really have, I talked about how our first stage generally is pre-charge, or once it's in the criminal legal system or at law enforcement stage. Currently we have one part-time staff on a program called the Conflict Assistance Program, which is about neighborhood conflicts or other stages of conflict that haven't escalated to crime yet, but do involve unresolved conflict where somebody might want some coaching through that or some mediation. But there's also the potential for when somebody is involved in a crime but doesn't want to go through the criminal legal system for a variety of reasons. And we just this past year, a number of stakeholders were involved in passing what's called Act 11 to kind of allow a loophole in the current prohibition of sending domestic and sexual violence cases, interpersonal violence cases to CJC. There is a law against that right now. But what we've heard from survivors is that the majority of survivors don't use the criminal legal system, again, for a variety of reasons. Act 11 will allow at least one more alternative for survivors of these crimes for another kind of process. We're still a ways away from actually operationalizing that, but that law allows for that. And so that's where I see the greatest potential for innovation and community involvement, is starting to think about law enforcement should, and Sarah George's office should be, and Department of Corrections should be a part of our public safety conversation, but there's a lot of other possibilities, and they don't all involve punishment. And our CJC looks at non-punitive methods of creating the conditions for people to hold themselves accountable. We're not the right response for many. If somebody's denying they had anything to do with a crime, if they're saying I don't take responsibility, they're not going to be an appropriate referral for the CJC. But we certainly are a part of that solution, and we just want people to know that the CJC is a willing partner to continue to move upstream from some of these dramatic needs that are causing such more expensive and more impactful and destructive often consequences for not just the individual but the community at large. We're really interested in looking at what are some upstream potential solutions. So I'm trying to keep it short. That I think hopefully that gives you a snapshot of what we do.
Great, thank you for that, Rachel. And I think some of the ideas about how municipalities, how local communities use CJCs more are an important part of the discussion now. It is notable how much Burlington CJC has expanded services over the last 5 years now, and I think further expansion could be the right response to the moment we're in as well. I want to go, sorry, I think we skipped over Chief Murad inadvertently, so Chief, I'll go back to you now.
Thank you, sir. Hello, everybody. It's great to have all of you here. It's a really full room again, which is terrific from the previous night. Are there slides available?
I see, maybe, so,
Nope,
I was
I guess
confused on
not.
the slides as well, so I think, why don't we see if we can fix that and
No
go to
problem.
Colo next and come back. Go ahead, Colo.
All right, thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the chance to be here tonight. I'm the Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer for the state of Vermont. I oversee the United States Attorney's Office, which is right up the street on Elmwood Avenue. I'd like to thank the mayor and Councilor Doherty for inviting me to come here. I was supposed to be here on Thursday, but I'm here tonight instead. I'll try to use the time I have to try to give a description of what our office is and what we do. I would like to give you an overview of our office, the United States Attorney's Office, what kinds of cases we do in the United States Attorney's Office, who our partners are, what the priorities of the United States Attorney's Office are right now, and share some statistics and some points or highlights to remember about the U.S. Attorney's Office. So we're the I like to think about it as the branch office of the Department of Justice in Vermont. We cover the whole state. We have about 50 employees, 55 employees in our office. About 25 of those are lawyers and the rest are staff. We enforce all criminal law in Vermont, criminal federal law in Vermont, as well as defend the United States and its agencies when they get sued in federal court. Of those 25 lawyers, approximately 17 of them are federal prosecutors enforcing federal criminal law here in Vermont. What kinds of cases we do? We do lots of different kinds of cases all across the state. We do drug cases, we do violent crime cases, cases that involve violations of the Gun Control Act. We do white-collar crime, civil rights cases, immigration cases, and other types of cases. You've probably all heard the saying, don't make a federal case out of it. There's a reason for that phrase. Federal cases are complicated, large-scale matters. They don't typically happen in one day. They are things that happen over a period of time. In terms of who we work with, we have many partners, all of the federal agencies that you can think of, like the FBI, the DEA, ATF, IRS, all of those we work with, and others. We also, here in Vermont, unlike some other U.S. attorneys' offices around the country, work a lot with our state and local partners. We work a tremendous amount with the Vermont State Police. We work a tremendous amount with Chief Murad and the Burlington Police Department and pretty much every other police department and sheriff's office around the state of Vermont. We also work with all of our state's attorneys in Vermont. We talk with them regularly about whether a case should proceed federally or in the state system. So Sarah's office and my office are in contact regularly to talk about violent crime cases or drug crime cases that happen in Chittenden County to determine whether that case is more appropriate for our office or for Sarah's office. Turning to our priorities right now, the Attorney General of the United States is Merrick Garland. His priorities are my priorities because he's ultimately my boss. And I think his priorities are good priorities. They are to protect public safety, to enforce civil rights, and to protect the rule of law. My office's number one priority right now is to address violent crime in Vermont. And we are doing that by taking more violent crime cases than we have historically. All the prosecutors in my office are doing those types of cases. Often those cases overlap with drug crime in Vermont. Unfortunately, it seems like more and more, almost every drug case that we see involves some element of violence. In terms of the points to highlight here and to remember about what the U.S. Attorney's Office does, what the federal prosecutors in Vermont do to try to protect public safety. Number one, as I said before, we do big, complicated cases. We can't do all the cases that we would like to do. Just like Sarah's office and every one that we partner with, we have limited resources. And in terms of those types of cases that we do, I think it's helpful to think about it in terms of moments in time versus putting all those moments in time together into a larger scale case. We don't prosecute cases generally that involve one single moment in time. We take lots of moments in time and try to put them together to build a larger case and have a greater impact. When we do those cases, both in terms of drug crime and violent crime and other kinds of crime, we are on the side of the victims in our community. Both victims of drug crime, violent crime, fraud, white-collar crime, all of those kinds of situations. We have a victim witness program in our office that works with the victims of all these kinds of crime. The second point is that right now we are spending a lot of time on violent crime. Sarah mentioned the number of homicide cases being investigated right now in Vermont. Our office is involved with a lot of those situations, largely because a lot of those situations involve drug crime, and that drug crime is a federal crime. Typically, if there's a homicide that has no connection to drug crime or some other kind of federal crime, we would not be involved with that. Typically, homicide is a state crime if you look around the country and see who's charging those kinds of cases. And then lastly, in terms of drug trafficking crime, our cases that we do try to disrupt large organizations that are bringing drugs to Vermont. As everyone has talked about tonight, our main problem right now, the thing that is driving a lot of the issues that were discussed on Thursday night and tonight is fentanyl, and our office is doing a tremendous amount of work prosecuting individuals and organizations who are bringing fentanyl to Vermont from out of state. That is a pattern that we've seen for a number of years, as long as I've been in the office, since 2010, but it's all the more serious now with fentanyl and fentanyl laced with xylazine coming into the state. We recognize that prosecution plays only one part in the solutions that we're trying to bring to bear to address this crisis that we're in and that the country is in, frankly. It's not just Vermont. It is happening all over Vermont. I want to be clear about that. We're not just talking about Burlington or Chittenden County. I can attest, based on what my office does, that these issues are in Brattleboro, they're in Bennington, they're in Rutland, they're in the Northeast Kingdom. They're pretty much everywhere, and they're everywhere around the country. We recognize that prosecution isn't the only solution, but that is my office's part of the solution. That is what we do. We're an office full of prosecutors. We are not policymakers, so we tend not to be involved in those decisions. We try very hard to prosecute individuals and organizations before they get a foothold in Vermont, although we don't always succeed at that. And we also recognize that not every crime is a federal crime. We are just one of the tools in the toolbox that exists to try to address these issues. That's why we partner with Sarah's office and all the other state's attorneys in Vermont. Quickly, some statistics. In 2022 and 2023, our office has opened approximately 57 gun and drug cases in Chittenden County. Since 2015, we've opened approximately 130 cases with one specific ATF agent as the lead agent. This individual works almost exclusively in Burlington. And then since 2017, the U.S. Attorney's Office has opened approximately 60 cases with one specific BPD drug detective as the lead agent. So that gives you some idea of the volume of cases just in this area that we're doing. And remember, these are big cases, not just one hand-to-hand deal that you might see happening on the street in Burlington. And the last thing I want to mention, because tonight's focus is on substance use disorder and solutions in that area, our office participates in 3 specialized courts that focus on treatment and helping individuals re-enter society in a productive way, including with places to live and employment. We have 2 we call them drug courts. One is in Rutland and one is in Burlington. Those courts are put in place to, the participants in those courts are guilty plea, pre-sentencing, and if they are successful in completing the program that is led by one of our federal district court judges, they are eligible to receive a time-served sentence and also potentially a reduction of the charge that they would plead guilty to. And then the other court that we participate in, which is led by our federal magistrate judge here in Burlington, is what's called a reentry court. That court participants are post-sentencing. They, just like in the drug courts, are participating in treatment with counselors from the Howard Center, social workers. There's a representative from the defense bar, as well as the judge and someone from our office. These individuals are eligible, if they successfully complete the program, to reduce the amount of time that they are supervised by the federal probation office after their sentence completes. Those are 3 excellent programs that we participate in and support and go a long way towards helping some of the defendants that we prosecute re-enter after their sentences are up and turn their lives around. Thanks, Moreau.
Great, thank you. Carlo, I think we were able to get your presentation over to you, Chief. We are, and we'll just
Yes.
remind all of us, we
You
are
know what?
definitely behind schedule.
Sir, I'll forego this, and this will be available, these slides will be available in the presentation, but more importantly, I'll be delivering these at the Police Commission meeting that will happen in the week after the Christmas holiday. We had 2 police commissioners at the last forum here. I was very glad to see them here. We have a commissioner here tonight, and I'll be able to explain all these slides. They'll be incorporated into the Chief's report, the monthly Chief's report. But I don't want to take up time when we have, I'm sure, lots of questions from the audience.
Okay, thank you, Chief.
No punchline.
And if we can get Jess's presentation back up.
I don't have slides.
You don't have slides, okay, great.
But do I need this thing? Do I have to turn this on? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jess Kirby. I am Director of Client Services at VCJR. in Burlington, which is on Bank Street. And we opened a reentry and recovery center about a year and a half ago in downtown Burlington with the help of the city and other supporters in hopes of providing another place for high-risk people to go, especially justice-involved people. So it's a recovery center for justice-involved people with substance use disorder. So all of our participants have substance use disorder. Many are untreated, and we're trying to help get into treatment. We have over 200 clients, and over 90%, I think, are homeless. So we're working with some of the people that are really struggling the most in Burlington and who are having a high impact on the community, and who are very high risk for overdose death, and very high risk for other harms, and providing a lot of services, and think that we're helping to bridge a gap in our community that, as Sarah was saying, we are, people are really struggling. Like others have said, we have a housing crisis, we have a COVID-19 crisis, we have a substance, a drug crisis where the drugs are more dangerous than ever, where people are struggling more than ever, where the impact on the community is higher than ever, and people are really in desperate need of very low barrier services and don't really have the ability to show up to appointments and really need to be able to just walk in, come as they are, no appointment necessary, and get access to various forms of help. So that's really what we're trying to do. We have peer services, we have case management, housing stuff, treatment stuff, put you in the car and take you to treatment, which is really needed. And we don't have a lot of hands-on that sort of case management in Chittenden County and probably in the state. And really, a lot of times that's what's needed. People get lost along the way. People are really desperate, people are defeated, and things are really hard. And so we need to reduce barriers to treatment even more than they are. We need expanded methadone access. We have one in all of Chittenden County. I personally work with a lot of people who sometimes take 6 months to a year to try to get to treatment and plan it for a really long time and have high hopes of getting there. And it doesn't quite pan out. And so we really need more doors for that. We need more options. I know the mayor has been working hard on that, and the settlement committee, and a lot of people are on board with that. But I think it's I would just like to bring the message that I think a lot of people think that that help is out there and it's easy to get if you really want it. And, I'm a person with lived experience myself with opioid use disorder, and I work, over the years, I've worked at Howard Center, at Safe Recovery for a long time, and doing harm reduction work for almost 10 years. It's not easy at all. It's actually really, really hard, especially when you have no place to sleep, you have no phone to set an alarm for an appointment, you have to be places by a very specific amount of time for treatment. People are struggling with precipitated withdrawal related to buprenorphine, which is making it really hard for people to access buprenorphine and become stabilized on that treatment, which is another reason why we really need more access to methadone. It is really hard for people to get the help they need. Places are struggling with staffing. People, a lot of the services look different now. I think a lot of people in our community are really struggling, and I'm really glad that we have partners and people who get that and know that we need to do all we can to really reduce the barriers for people as much as possible and expand services. So that's my message, and I'm trying to keep it short because I know we have a lot of questions, and that's the whole point. Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you to all of our panelists. And now, yes, let's, I think how we'll try to do this, if people would like to ask a question, when you raise your hand, I'll recognize 3 people at a time. We'll go in order. Jordan has a mic, and we'll get to as many people as we can. So I'm going to start with Romeo here in the front row, and then the gentleman in the, with the blazer, 2, and then Jess, we'll go to you, 3.
I was told there would be 4 in line. Now you're choosing who gets to speak.
Thank you for all of you for being here. So my question is based on personal experience working at the transit center and seeing a lot of folks who bring in a lot of needles to the transit center, both used and unused as well. So based on my experience, what we do, again, I'm not going to speak on behalf of GMT, but based on my experience, when we take needles that are used and we have those needle collection thing, we take it to Howard Center. I have seen folks that are being given nearly 200 needles, brand new needles, as well as the like a tin foil and crack pipes and all that stuff. So what I was wondering was, if somebody's provided all the stuff they need except the drug itself, how are they able to help themselves out to get out of this sort of like recycle situation? They're trying to get a treatment, but I don't think that is necessarily a treatment. If somebody's being provided the 200 free needles, clean, be it clean or not, the crack pipes, the tin foil, the thing to get your blood going or whatever. And most of the time when I speak to these folks, they're more than happy to take that, and they're not going to necessarily take everything inside at Howard Center. So I'm trying to find out how is that helping per se to those folks who definitely need or are desperate to get help. That's one component to my question. The second component, quickly, I will ask to Sarah, is that I also see a lot of folks who repetitively steal from stores that show up at a transit center as well, or at least on our buses, and that are basically gleefully happy to be stealing over and over again. And some of them, based on, as I understand, they've just been either released and they go back again and steal again. So I'm wondering, how is that helping the community per se, based on, I do understand there's a lot of caseloads, but we are feeling the impact both in the transit community, the transit center community, as well as just in the community in general. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Romeo. We'll give you two questions, but let's try to keep it here to get to as many people as possible. Let's have one each. Maybe Jess, could you speak to how, I think the first question about the role of safe recovery and how,
I will tell you that, as I said, I'll start by saying I'm a person with lived experience myself with opioid use disorder. Okay, sorry. Jeez. Is it working? Okay. I have opioid use disorder myself. I actually utilized the syringe service program in Burlington, and I will tell you that it was the only place that I went for services. It was the only people that I was connected with, and yes, syringes and those sorts of things are provided, but also a connection with treatment providers is provided, and that is the place that I ended up accessing treatment when I was ready. And they just kept keeping that door open for me. And so, and what research shows is that people are actually 5 times more likely to enter treatment if they are engaging with a certain service program. So we know that it actually helps people get into treatment, not the opposite, through research many years with certain service programs. So, and I worked at the syringe program here in Burlington at Safe Recovery, and I will say that we helped a lot of people get into treatment, a lot of people with housing and all kinds of services that they weren't having access to otherwise. And you can't force people to get into recovery. You have to keep keeping that door open and helping people stay safe and giving them a safe place to ask for help and to help people connect when they're ready. So is that helpful?
thanks.
Okay.
Good, sir.
So I guess I just will briefly say the same thing I already said, that there isn't a legal avenue to just hold people in jail while their cases are pending. It is literally against the law and our Constitution to do that. So if somebody is stealing repetitively from a store, I would first say that it's often 2 months at least until our office knows anything about it. And that's if we get the cases from law. If the cases are investigated and solved, and then those cases come to us, it's often 2 months at least until our office knows anything about it. So in that time, people are, of course, able to continue to engage in that behavior without our office ever knowing it's happening until much later on. And then by the time we do, we can't just hold people in jail. They are entitled to their freedom And they are presumed innocent until we have proven at trial that they are guilty. And that is another delay while we are attempting to do that. So that's how our system works. I'm not saying it's perfect. It is certainly flawed. We want to be able to have these cases a lot sooner from law enforcement. I think law enforcement would say they want to be able to investigate and solve them a lot quicker. They're not always that easy to do. And then we would love to be able to engage in resolutions to get people into services and hold them accountable much quicker. It just isn't generally how our system is designed to work, unfortunately. Did you want to add to that, or were you? No? Okay.
So first of all, I'd like to say thank you for sharing all this data, just because I'm in the data business, so I'm always fascinated by all of this. Some of the data that I did on my own shows that the in-person recovery runs at about 80%, right, is what I've been able to find online. I can share the links with you if you want. But the outpatient only works about 20%. And that's actually 20% of the people that actually go to the outpatient program. These are national studies, and depending on the one that I looked up, it was all for whether it was methadone or the other ones, it was inconclusive. So you're talking about an 80% success rate for in-person. That's all the people that go to in-person. And the only thing that we have here is out-person, that it's up to them if they want to go, and it only works 20% of the time. Sarah George's department, because of the laws that are on the books, can't prosecute all of the adjacent crimes that happen with this. The police department is short-staffed. So why are we still handing out all the needles?
Dr. Levine, I think would be helpful. This question, I think certainly hear from many individuals questions about whether, I think there was a big shift away from residential services, and maybe you could speak to that trend and the thinking behind it, and whether I tend to think that we do need more to go back to more reliance on residential treatment. Maybe you could speak to your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what data you're accessing, but the reality is it's very challenging this is a lifelong illness. If we call recovery your journey from being actively involved with the drug as the main focus of your life to actually being able to live a life and do a lot of other things, that's an important endpoint. Retention and treatment is notoriously challenging to measure and then to interpret, because not everybody needs to be on treatment lifelong after they've begun treatment, and many can be on varying times. And as you know, there are non-medication forms of treatment. Often they're sort of poo-pooed, and it's like, well, no, you've got to do medication assisted treatment, as it's called. But the reality is people succeed in a variety of different venues. So the whole enterprise is very, very challenging. But to get to your question, which echoes the first question, you've done a great job of describing what harm reduction is. So everything that's being done is to keep people alive, respecting the fact that they have an illness, that they're just not at the stage of thinking when they're going to access treatment and try to get into recovery. So the only viable candidate for a treatment program is an alive candidate. Can't do anything with a person who's succumbed to their disorder for whatever purpose. They had dirty needles and got hepatitis. They got dirty needles and got a bloodstream infection and a heart infection and died from that. The list goes on and on and on. So harm reduction is still a critical ingredient, because everybody's in a different place with regards to their disease. Jess, you probably want to.
I'll just say that, I think we do, need more options for, we do need more options for inpatient treatment, and it would be, I think, beneficial for people to have, we have 2 places that people who get Medicaid can go for inpatient treatment, for about 2 weeks. And I do think that it would be beneficial for people to be able to stay longer periods of time and maybe have other options than the places that, like the commissioner said, it is lifelong illness, it's chronic and relapsing, and sometimes people are accessing these places 5-10 times, even more than that. So I do think that's a component we need, that we need more of that, but also that, especially with opioid use disorder, which is probably causing the most harm in our community and taking the most lives, I think medication-assisted treatment is the standard of care and is the most effective in helping people achieve recovery, so.
And these are very individual decisions that are clinically made, so people get medical assessments and other assessments to know what is the best modality of treatment that will help them. And the literature, unfortunately, on residential treatment in terms of duration, which is always what the focus has been on, is really poor. We don't understand what the appropriate duration is. So people with a lot of money go to the Betty Ford Center and may go there for 3 to 6 months. To say that they might have a better outcome than someone who's on Medicaid in Vermont and went to one of our residential centers and stayed for less than a month is really a tough comparison to make, unfortunately.
Thank you. This is a question for Dr. Levine, or maybe Jess too, and it follows nicely on the conversation we've just been having. At the candidate forum that was here a few weeks ago, one of the candidates advocated for forced treatment for substance use disorder. And aside from being legally fraught and logistically fraught, is there any evidence, and aside from the fact that we don't have enough voluntary treatment, is there any evidence to support forced treatment for substance use disorder?
Can I start?
Yeah.
So this is not an expansive literature, it's a fairly sparse literature, but the literature that's out there that now has undergone some systematic meta-analysis comes out on the side that we'll call it forced or coercive treatment. If you look at the ultimate outcome, there's a higher rate of people dying. Now, this is not immediately, but this is obviously over time, because it's often in populations of people who really aren't ready to embrace treatment. They lose their tolerance to the medication while they're getting treated, and then end up overdosing when they're out of their coerced treatment regimen. So it's actually something that doesn't pan out the way that the best intentioned people might have thought it would be. Mainly because of this whole, it's the same phenomenon that occurs when you put somebody into a correctional facility and they go through withdrawal and they can stay there for a week or 3 years. They're going to have very low tolerance to opioids because they haven't been on them steadily unless there's been some stuff happening, funny stuff happening in the prison where they have access to those drugs. So when they leave, the first 2 weeks of transition back to the community is the highest risk time in all of substance use disorder land, because it's traditional when people who have poor supports, haven't had these kind of warm handoffs that Jess is trying to create and sustain and nurture, those people will end up going back to the same settings, to the same habits, and only a smaller amount of what they used to take a lot of can kill them.
I'll just add to that. My read of the literature is similar to Dr. Levine's, and yet I understand where that question is coming from. Some of the really significant voices in the country around this issue, people like Sam Quinones, have started raising the prospect that we do need more compulsory actions, and I think it was essentially kind of maybe underlying one of their prior questions as well. And this is sort of one of the reasons why I'm not quite in the same place as Dr. Levine is on kind of taking a I think what you described as sort of a very kind of deliberate approach. I think we are truly in a crisis right now where what was working just a few years ago, and when I showed those overdose numbers, death numbers a few years ago, it wasn't just overdose deaths that were going down. It was also many of the other issues that I sense are motivating people in the room to be here. Property crime was going down. Stolen vehicles during that period were not nearly the issue they are today. We saw very few needles out on the streets. When our treatment system was working and working well, we had, not only were we saving lives, the impact on the community was much less than we are experiencing today. I think clearly that has changed very dramatically, and we need urgent, dramatic action in response to it. When, we were in 2014, then Governor Shumlin devoted his entire State of the State address to this issue and said it should be, literally the entire State of the State address said it had to be the top issue. We were losing something like a third of the Vermonters every year. I think we lost about 80 people that year. We're going to lose more than 240 this year. And it is bigger than just the devastating loss of all of those Vermonters. That's an enormous number. It dwarfs the number of people that we lose to traffic accidents, that we lose to gun violence, these other sort of avoidable deaths. It is much larger than those other figures, and it is growing. And that is why I think it is of such concern. But it is not just about the deaths. It is also because this issue has these broader community impacts, and when we are seeing it get further and further out of control, it seeps into all these other areas and does cause us to be asking, people, do we need to be locking a lot more people up? I think we are a long way from there being. I don't see any evidence that is a solution that works or is available to us. I do think it is one of the reasons we do need the criminal justice system working better than it has since the pandemic. I think you've gotten a lot of information tonight on how it's broken down, and the urgency on being able to hold people accountable for real. I think we should be focused on holding people accountable for what we all agree are crimes before we are thinking about sort of forcing people into treatment. So. Let's try to come over to this side of the room. I see this hand here first, and then I'll go to you next, and then we'll go to the back, unless, Jordan, yeah, that's what I call that.
You can probably all hear me.
Yes, we can.
Everybody agrees that we have a huge drug problem here. I see this gentleman, what he was talking about, because I walk that street with my grandson, and there's needles everywhere. I see people, one woman was cleaning up needles on Battery Street by herself after the encampments were there, and the high schoolers are right there. And they're walking up and down the street, and there's all this stuff. I mean, I can't think of a worse situation for our young people. You're talking about harm reduction for people that already have an addiction, and that's a whole nother problem. But we have to keep society safe. That is our number one responsibility. And we're failing terribly. I'm walking up Cherry Street or Church Street, and there's a woman injecting herself next to the transit thing, and then she's tossing her needles. My grandson's going, what is she doing? And so a 6-year-old gets a talk about addiction. I said, have you ever heard of what addiction is, Jack? I mean, none of you are succeeding. We have got to stop the drugs coming in here. That's the number one priority. Never mind getting everything else. If you don't stop the drugs, none of your housing or in-house things, none of that's going to work. And you need to prosecute. For somebody that is trafficking drugs, put them away and lock away the key, because they are causing all of this harm and making money on it. I can't think of a more heinous thing to do, because their victims are often people that need help. And I could go on, but drugs. Thank you.
Does anyone want to respond to?
I think the honest answer, too, is that none of our current systems are effective, working. There's no easy solution to stopping the drugs coming in when there's such a huge demand. So I don't think we're ever going to find this one magic solution, or that the answers don't all lie in law enforcement. I think it really is an unprecedented time for the community at large to come up with some new solutions. I'm not sure that's going to solve the problem.
We had this next gentleman next.
And then I'm going to go to Ed after you.
Hi, thank you, panelists. I think it's obvious that each facet of our community trying to address this problem is overwhelmed. So I have a number of questions. I'll keep it to one. If we want to do what is empathetic and humane, I'm also concerned that we don't want to become a magnet to bring other people to our community with problems, with more crime. So I'm curious, I have heard secondhand that a number of the people who are houseless in our downtown have come here, have been encouraged to come here because of the programs that we have. So how do we prevent ourselves from continuously being overwhelmed? Thank you.
Thanks, sir. This is a question I get a lot. It's a concern. Your concern is one I hear a lot from the public here. It's also one, if you look across the country, this is frequently, it's a fear in other cities as well. One kind of empirical look we've had at that recently, the biggest study on homelessness ever was done in California this last summer. And one of the striking findings of that report was that, and I understand you were asking about needles, but people fear the same thing about if you provide a high level of homelessness services, will that attract people there? And what they found was that over 90% of the people who were homeless in California had their last time they had been housed had also been a California address. And when you sort of start to unpack it, you think about it, if you become homeless and are in a crisis, it's a challenging time to pick up and move to a whole nother community, a whole nother place. And I will say when we've tried to get a handle around similar stats here in Burlington, we've had similar results. Not that there is nothing to the idea. You will certainly, I've seen it on the news accounts. Someone will tell a television reporter they came here from South Carolina or something. That is, those are outliers in terms of the data that we see when we talk to people at the Community Resource Center, where we hand out free meals, when we talk to people at the shelters. These are people that have local backgrounds, by and large. So to me, I don't see a lot of evidence that is happening. And even if it were, we can't let people freeze on our streets, right? Like we just opened a winter warming shelter down the street. That's what I think this community is committed to doing, is helping people in great need and keeping people alive. And but to your larger point, are our services overwhelmed right now? They absolutely are, and that is part of the challenge we are in at this moment.
Can I respond quickly?
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say that I don't know what would be so attractive. I think there's this idea that we have like this cushy system, and people are really suffering and struggling, and I don't think we have anything cushy. Like all states have, access to like food stamps, if you will, and, things like that. And our housing system is completely overwhelmed. Like we have we do not have enough shelter. The city has, stood up something to try to help, but there are not shelters that people can go to for enough people that there are. We have minimal certain service programs. We do have like robust access to medication-assisted treatment, but all states have that. The places that don't have certain service programs, actually, there is no evidence that they do better when it comes to substance use at all. And so I think we're really struggling here. Our services are overwhelmed, and I don't know what would be so attractive, what the cushy idea is, but I do know that people have that idea, and I work with a lot of people who are houseless, and they're like 95% or more are from Vermont, or I've known around here for many, many years. So I just don't know if that's actually happening or if it's like a fear that we have. But so, yeah, I'll just say that.
I think
And
Vermont, yes, but they are absolutely coming from other places than Burlington to this city. And the increase that we have had in houselessness is driven by people who were not always in Burlington. That is a significant portion of those folks. And many people are indeed struggling, but I think our community is struggling too, and I don't think we think often enough about the ways in which all of us are struggling. Sometimes because of what's going on with this very small subpopulation for which we don't have any good ideas or good solutions. And part of that is the fact that our laws do not give us the tools that we need. We are at a place where there is a legal reckoning to be had at the Montpelier level around what tools are available to us to address these incredibly intransigent and trenchant problems.
It's a good transition, Chief. Would you like to speak to several of the legislative changes that you and I have been talking about and then we'll be advocating again for this year?
Sir, the ones that you and I have certainly advocated for have to do primarily with violence. But with regard to other issues, I think there are many of the things that the state's attorney talked about with regard to how we absolutely as a state do not prioritize intervention, that we move away from it as much as possible, are other things that need to be addressed. And those aren't things that you and I have specifically spoken about, sir. Those have mostly been what you and I have spoken about has mostly been around, for example, the need for a felony statute for reckless endangerment in order to address gun violence. But we also, we probably need to address the thresholds.
The three of us have talked,
for larceny.
including the state's attorney, have talked about the need for, and you alluded to it, Sarah, in your presentation, the stolen vehicle,
Yes, sir.
which is a property crime that is having a huge impact on this community. We do not have a stolen vehicle. You can't actually charge someone for a stolen vehicle. Could you maybe
You cannot have a GTA Vermont. There can be no video game GTA Vermont because the charge doesn't exist in the state. So something along those lines, yes.
Do you want to add anything to that, sir?
No.
Okay. Another thing that we advocated for last year, we'll be advocating for it again. Have some hope the legislature is going to take it up this year. Is retail theft. We do not have a system, as I understand it, and I'm not the lawyer at the table, but again, if you want to, my understanding of the issue is each individual retail crime is treated as its own incident under Vermont law. That is not the case everywhere, including in neighbors such as New York, where prosecutors and the courts can look to a pattern of crimes and come to different conclusions about recidivist individuals. My hope is that the law will change with respect to that this coming year. All right, I hear by popular demand that people want to be able to come up to the mic, and maybe that's a little fair, so people in an orderly way could form a line behind Ed here, and great. We should have time for the four of you, and we'll try to close right around 8 o'clock, though, so go ahead, Ed. And which means, it only gives us about 5 minutes left and go a little beyond that.
Hey, thank you. Well, first of all, in general, I just want to commend the panel. I want to recognize your years, sometimes lifetimes of dedication to this and other, public safety and health issues. I really mean that from the bottom of my heart. I want to say that you've done an excellent job in explaining the law enforcement ramifications and some of the treatment and harm reduction ramifications, some of the statistics about death that we see in Vermont today. And But what you've really done an excellent job of is describing and explaining the overwhelming, catastrophic public health emergency that we're facing in Vermont today. It may not be declared formally, but that doesn't make it any less real. We saw it wasn't 240 people in 2022, it was 263 people in 2022, and it'll probably surpass that in 2023. These are Vermonters, fellow Vermonters that are dying on the street. These are people that need to be protected. You know, we talk, and believe me, I sympathize with the audience completely. The level of grief in this room, the level of desire to do something for fellow Vermonters in this room is overwhelming. We have some tools, along with the tools that have been described today, that we're not using, and I'm just going to describe it briefly. It's the second bullet on Mayor Weinberger's bullet list. The first bullet was the expansion of methadone treatment. The second bullet was overdose prevention centers. Overdose prevention centers have been used globally for decades. There's a system of overdose prevention centers in Canada. There are 2 overdose prevention centers in New York, 2 scheduled to open in Rhode Island. Minnesota is moving toward it. The Department of Health in Massachusetts just came out with a study supporting overdose prevention centers being opened in Massachusetts. These are hubs. Some people call them comprehensive user engagement centers. They're places where people, you know, who have severe substance use disorder, people with mental health challenges, grown-ups who have children, had multiple adverse childhood experiences, people who have over decades been beaten half to death by the war on drugs, don't trust the system. The number that Dr. Levine referred to, very high percentage of people who die in Vermont don't have any access to or have never had any contact with helping systems. The number is 76%. 76%. These people are dying every day in Vermont. Overdose prevention centers, because they offer what Jessica and Dr. Levine and Mayor Weinberger have alluded to as harm reduction, overdose prevention centers work. What they say is, you don't have to abstain from drugs to be welcome here. We're not going to place that demand on you because we know you can't achieve that demand.
Do you have a question for the panel, or?
I'm gonna finish, Mayor.
Okay.
Overdose prevention centers, to finish up, are a win-win. Primarily, they save lives. They reverse overdoses. They also significantly decrease in public drug use, significantly decrease in discarded drug paraphernalia, significantly refer people on to further health-promoting services. In fact, in New York, on point, they've hired 25 or 30 people who began as participants are now staff members. Dr. Levine heads up a committee, the Opioid Abatement Settlement Advisory Committee, that is in charge of polling the committee and making recommendations, and we are about to take an historical step. We are about to vote on overdose prevention centers, and I think we will vote successfully, and then this money will be freed up and we can establish one in Burlington first because it has the highest number of deaths per year, and in other places too. So I'm gonna end now. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Todd.
I thought you guys were going to answer his question.
I don't think there was a question.
There never is.
We're gonna take Todd and then 2 more. We're not gonna have time to get to everybody, okay?
So,
You're the last person.
this summer, I called 911 because I was getting threatened by a drug dealer downtown. And the police showed up, and they let the drug dealer go away, and they prosecuted me for calling 911. Now, here we are living in a country where the FBI themselves say that in the last 70 years, almost all crime in this country has been committed by undercovers, like Whitey Bulger is an example. So, and we're also living in a country where our police officers were trained to do torture in the military. And we're also living in a country where the politicians like to say we don't have a right to ask these questions. Okay, how come I'm getting prosecuted and yet you literally allowed these people to run around this town trying to scare everybody because you lost a little funding to give you back your funding? So my question really comes down to, who's protecting us from you guys? Because you know what? Most every single gun in this country was sold by a person with a badge or who served in the military. There are more gun dealers in this country, okay, than there are McDonald's and fast food companies and Starbucks combined. And they were all badges, and they were all servicing in the military mostly. And what's up with the Sackler family still walking around giving you guys money so that you can not lock up the real drug dealers who created the problem while you chase around all the poor people, blaming the poor people for the problems you guys are getting paid off to ignore? Who's protecting us from you? Nobody.
Okay, thank you, Todd. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Dan Toll, and first of all, I want to thank all of you for coming out on this pre-holiday night to speak to us and answer questions. And in particular, I'd like to commend you for including Jess, who's a community leader who has lived experience. I too am a peer with lived experience, including mental health and housing insecurity. I also had a consulting firm right here in Vermont focused on ending homelessness and improving the lives of people who are dealing with mental health conditions and substance use disorder. So my question first to you, Jess. Thank you for being here and thank you for telling your story. How do you feel the city and the state is doing when it comes to incorporating the voice of us peers in policy making and decision making, as well as funding the use of peers on the front lines? And when I say peers, I mean people with lived experience on the front lines to address these issues. I'm also interested in hearing what our municipal leader has to say, as well as our law enforcement leader has to say about this issue of using peers, both substance use peers, mental health peers, people who have lived experience on the front lines, but as importantly, as part of the decision-making process, as part of policy-making when it comes to dealing with these issues. So Jess, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will say that I agree with what I think, guys, gosh, I'm sorry. I agree with what I think you're saying, that the lived experience voice of people with, that have experience with mental health and substance use issues is extremely important and should be involved in decision making and policy making and in direct service and in all of these things. I think that there is some effort for that to happen. I know, like on the opiate settlement committee, there were positions that, that needed to be for people with lived experience. I know that legislators try to hear testimony from people with lived experience. I think there's an effort to do that, but I think we need to do a lot better. I would like to see a lot more people, like me, that have really lived, through very challenging times, have opportunities to be in direct service that, and I think that for a lot of reasons, poverty included, and barriers, and all of those things, it is hard for people to get to that point, but I think I would like there to be more effort in those ways, and that it's really important, and I think there's some effort, and that we need to do better.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I would say it's a major part of the way the city approaches this. debrief with Jess after every one of these community stat meetings that we talk about. The city has an employee who works on this issues, an individual with lived experience. At this 60, 70-person table, there are numerous people there that have lost children or parents or in some other way have been in recovery themselves, and we certainly have tried to, particularly around the opioid use disorder, tried to incorporate those lessons into the way that we set up these systems. So it's, I certainly would hope, Jess, you think that the people have had a large voice at that table.
I do,
and it's been a major way that we've approached it.
There were nearly 1,200 mental health issue calls for service last year, and while this year is not quite as high, it's higher than it's been in any of the previous 6 or 7 years. There are going to be 450 or so overdose calls for service this year. That is higher than it's ever been. It's up actually by 265% over the previous 5-year average. I think every single police officer and every single employee of the Burlington Police Department and every single employee of the Burlington Fire Department and increasingly every single member of our community has lived experience with these issues because of that. And I think that we need to prioritize some of that experience as well.
Yeah. And lived experience, we do have Team 2 and CIT training, so, which is mental health training for law enforcement and first responders, by the way. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great, and we'll take a final question.
Hi, guys. You may not want to hear from me, but my name is David Foss. I live at Decker Towers, which is the epicenter of all that's going on. We have a number of folks that have been evicted. They're still living in the building. We have a number of folks that are dealing with drugs, stolen merchandise. We have a ton of homeless that are living in the stairwells and the floors. We try to lock all the community rooms. They're still in there. Countless damage. We live in a BHA property where my house, as well as a lot of others, don't have proper hot water. Hot water doesn't work consistently. We have a number of, it's filthy, dirty. We can't get it clean. We do need to advocate for, there's a lot of us in our building that are scared to death because of the countless number of the traffic. It's definitely mental issues, the drug issues. We got to find out the root of all this stuff. Everyone does have to work together somehow. But what can we do now? I'd like to see some legislative changes in city council and state, maybe providing for quicker evictions, emergency evictions, where you get people threatening people with death. And we have that constantly in our building. And how can we fight COVID if we can't take hot showers reasonably, keep the germs? And, you know, we need help from everybody. We're trying, we've got 160 residents, and then there's another 40 people or more living in our building that aren't residents. They stay with people. And the resources in that building is completely overrun. We have Narcan, which works, but we have a lot of calls to Decker Towers for emergency services, medical services. Jess, I want to get involved with you more and more because a lot of people in our building don't even know about you.
Yeah. I was going to say I would love to connect with you after
Yes.
and talk
But
to you
folks,
and exchange info.
can we somehow get together and some kind of, these people are afraid now. All these things that are happening are great for the future, but what can we do now to, the number of people that are scared and are dying? I mean, we got people afraid to come out of their apartments because they're afraid they're going to get mugged or robbed right in the building. There's countless number of needles and everything else everywhere. That's all.
David, thank you for coming out tonight and updating that list. It's been a situation of real concern for some time, and I'm hearing from you that it's still very bad. So thank you, and we'll try to get your information before you leave too, so we can follow up with you. Okay, thank you all for being here tonight. Any final thoughts from any of the panelists? Anyone want to say anything further? I think we'll call it there. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate you being part of this conversation.
You need police reform if you want to fix these problems as well. Remember that. The police are a part of the problem.